Welcome to Water Action Wednesday. This is the second in our series of insider briefings for our members, each on a specific topic. Make sure to look out for them every month. There's another one coming up next month. This one is going to be specifically on PFAS. What's next on PFAS? These are some issues that I'm sure you all as our members have gotten recent emails on, and we want to talk to you a little bit about what's coming up next around the bend, and understand where we are and where we're going to be. So with that, please feel free to ask any questions at any time. You can post them in the chat, and on Facebook you can make a comment. And big thanks to Laura, who's agreed to monitor those for me. So thanks a lot, Laura. And let's jump right into it here. So today, what we're going to go over here is first an overview of PFAS. So we're all on the same page. What are these chemicals? Where we find them? We're going to go over a little bit more specifically what the PFAS issues are that we face in Minnesota, what we've done in the state so far, and then we'll talk a little bit about a recent publication by the state of Minnesota, the state agencies. It's called Minnesota's PFAS Blueprint, and we'll talk about how Clean Water Action kind of fits into that larger scheme of things, that roadmap to addressing these harmful chemicals in our state. So let's jump right in. So PFAS, it's short for per and polyfluoral alkyl substances. So, try to say that 5 times fast. Most people though, will just call them PFAS or fluorinated chemicals, or more recently, forever chemicals has really been the verbiage that's been used a lot by us and by the Star Tribune and other large media, because that's really what PFAS are when you come down to it. They're this class of chemicals that is characterized by chains of carbon fluoride bonds. And those are just some of the most stable and strong bonds in chemistry, which means that stability gives them a number of characteristics that are both useful and very problematic. And some of those characteristics would be, grease resistance, water resistance, heat resistance, acid resistance, the list goes on. And that makes them very useful for a number of different applications in our in products and industrial applications, but also, when you think about the mechanisms that nature has to break down chemicals naturally, it's usually going to be water or some sort of oil or heat, and PFAS are resistant to all those properties. So they do not degrade naturally, really, in our environment at all. They stick around. Unfortunately, they're also found in a number of different products and have both industrial and commercial applications. Food packaging is a big one, and we'll get to how we've started to address that here in Minnesota. Anti-stain treatments, on either clothing or furniture, upholstery, firefighting foam, weather-resistant clothing, electronics, even ski wax. The list goes on and on and on. So these are found really in a number of different products, and chrome plating, paper mills. These are a number of industrial applications that PFAS are used for as well. Machinery. Unfortunately, as useful as PFAS are, they are unfortunately linked to a variety of really detrimental health effects, including a number of cancers, particularly testicular and kidney cancer, developmental defects in children, endocrine disruption, decreased fertility, cardiovascular effects, particularly an increased risk of heart disease and increased cholesterol, liver impacts, and particularly worrying as we exit this pandemic is the decreased immune system response, and in fact a decreased vaccine response as well. So particularly worrying. This is honestly just the health effects that we know right now as well. Almost all of these health impacts were a part or came out of this a 2008, what was called the C8 panel. So we're still learning more and more over the years. This is really just the most documented evidence we have are for these health impacts, but there's more links as well. So to kind of wrap this up, when we think about at Clean Water Action, when we think about if we're going to really make a chemical a priority or really work to ban it or regulate it, it's got to have one of these or a number of these characteristics. Is it persistent? Does it stick around in the environment for a long time? Does it bioaccumulate, aka go up the food chain? Fish drink it, birds eat the fish, et cetera, et cetera. Is it toxic? Does it have these documented health impacts? And is it mobile? Does it go between soil to water, soil to air, one of those things? And the reason why there's been such concern over PFAS, not just from us, but from the scientific community, from regulators, is that it shares all of these characteristics to the extreme. It's extremely persistent. It's very bioaccumulative. It's extremely toxic, and it moves very quickly between water bodies, from soil to water, et cetera. So that's why PFAS has become this big issue that we need to address as soon as possible. So what do we have? What are the issues in Minnesota? There's a number of them. Some of these are issues that right now, to be quite honest, most states have. Firefighting foam is one of these. PFAS containing foams are usually used particularly for like oil fires or chemical fires. They make, the technical term is aqueous film forming foams. And so this will, PFAS foams will be used to create a film over a fire so the fumes can't escape, so it smothers the whole fire, even if it's a really rampaging oil fire or something. So this is used at airports and refineries in particular, but unfortunately it's even used a lot at local fire departments because firefighters, they want a product that they can use on everything. And the PFAS foams are that kind of product. You can really spray it on most fires and it will contain that fire. And so it has been a difficulty to talk to firefighters and say, well, you might need to just hold these for the most egregious fires and use something else for the common house fire or just a small building fire or something. We have banned, and we'll get to this in a second, we've taken some action on PFAS in firefighting foam in Minnesota. We've banned testing and training and some other stuff, but it's still used pretty commonly. We have some real contamination that's happened from that, particularly around Bemidji and Duluth airports. There have been some communities that have contaminated drinking water. In the case of Bemidji, they had to dig a whole new city well, municipal well, for their community because so many of their drinking water sources were contaminated with PFAS as a result of runoff from these firefighting foams. So that continues to be a real issue in a number of states. Textiles are also a major source. Actually, one of the biggest sources of PFAS in landfills, along with food packaging, but there are currently no state or federal regulations on this. Actually, I should say Vermont just passed a couple weeks ago a ban on PFAS in textiles, I believe, but there's still no federal regulations and certainly nothing in Minnesota. Particularly, this is going to be found in weather-resistant clothing, like what's pictured here, but also in outdoor gear, like let's say a tent. A lot of tents could have PFAS, or stain-resistant fabrics, like I mentioned before. Upholstered furniture, even aftermarket sprays. Sometimes when you buy a new couch, they'll ask you if you want a stain-resistant additive, and that's usually going to be a PFAS surfactant that's added to make sure stains just kind of fall right off. It's also problematic throughout. Textiles become problematic throughout the life cycle. And some of you will know this, but when we talk about the life cycle of a product, we're talking, during the manufacturing phase, when it's in use, and then, certainly if it's recycled at all, of course, then it's reused, and then eventually ends up being disposed of. So textiles are problematic throughout the life cycle, because during the manufacturing, textile plants can be a major source of PFAS contamination in water. And then during use, of course, when these products are recycled, you might have PFAS ending up in a product where it wasn't intentionally supposed to be there, and is used for a different application. And then, of course, when it ends up in the landfill, there's issues as well. Minnesota has a number of closed landfills that just recently, the state of Minnesota found that we had some serious groundwater contamination under a lot of those closed landfills. So something we're just continuing to find. Biosolids. So as you can see with the picture here, biosolids are essentially our sewage from a wastewater treatment plant, all the solids that are then treated and dried out, and then used as a fertilizer on fields. Now, in Minnesota, we still can land apply biosolids, not on food crops like wheat or barley, or something that's going to be directly for human consumption, but you can still land apply biosolids on so-called feed crops. So anything that's going to be made into hay for cattle consumption or something, that you can still put biosolids on all of that. And because there's so many sources of PFAS right now, whether it be industrial or from our products, wastewater treatment plants end up with a lot of PFAS coming through their systems. And therefore, biosolids that come out of that process can be very, very, can have very huge concentrations of PFAS. So applying it on land applying these biosolids can have a huge impact in concentrations in, of course, the hay that then as we talked about by accumulation, it's then ending up in the cattle, then we eat the cattle, et cetera, et cetera. So the good news is we just recently, during this legislative session, saw some funding passed that will get a whole new study done from the state of Minnesota, finding out new strategies for wastewater treatment plants to prevent PFAS from entering their biosolids. Because at the end of the day, we really don't want to end up putting all of these biosolids in a landfill, and there's really not much else to do with them. So we really need to stop the PFAS from getting in there beforehand. And this brings us sort of to disposal. there's really no perfect way to destroy PFAS. Really, the best way, the most ideal way, would be to incinerate at a very, very, very high temperature. Most of our incinerators do not get up to that temperature. So, any incineration that's happening right now of PFAS has the risk of spreading, it into the air. So we certainly do not currently endorse any kind of incineration of PFAS, even if it's in a small amount of PFAS in a product. Incinerating right now generally means you could have a lot of that floating in the air, which of course is a huge issue. We don't want any of that. We certainly don't want to take PFAS from one area and incinerate it and basically move it to another area. There's also a large amount of waste to dispose of. We talking about firefighting foam, there's just, now that fire departments have learned that they shouldn't be using the PFAS foam. Even the best actors, they don't want to use the foam anymore. Well, it ends up sitting on shelves, and they try to get rid of it. Well, that's a lot of firefighting foam that needs to be destroyed. And how do you do it? So these are some really big disposal issues that we really haven't come up with a good solution to yet. Even our treatment technology, just a regular water filter like the one shown, that's what you would call a granulated activated carbon filter, most like a Brita filter or Pure, or like any of those point of use filters. They have the same technology as the big municipal water treatment technologies that would remove PFAS. And when you remove all those contaminants, it doesn't disappear, of course. It just gets highly concentrated into that carbon. And you still need to figure out a way to get rid of that highly concentrated PFAS waste. So that's still a nut that we have not yet cracked. Finally, kind of the big last issue that we have in Minnesota is taxpayers are still responsible for cleanup in Minnesota. Other than the 3M settlement, which, if anybody is unfamiliar, the state of Minnesota settled with 3M Corporation to the tune of $850 million for PFAS contamination in the East Metro. And those dollars are just for getting the people in the East Metro clean, drinkable water, right? And that's all that money is going to be used for. So that money will not be for the people and the folks in Bemidji that are experiencing contamination from firefighting foam. They're not going to be used for folks that live close to a landfill that might have some groundwater issues. So that's still money that any kind of cleanup that would happen of those would come out of whatever the legislature gives the Pollution Control Agency or the DNR, and when they remediate that. So that's all taxpayer money. The other big issue here is that PFAS are still not considered a hazardous substance under our state Superfund law. And these Superfund laws are really important. Something like our state law, MRLA, Minnesota Environmental Response and Liability Act, or the federal version, CERCLA, what they do is if PFAS were to be considered a hazardous substance under that law, the state would be able to investigate any contamination that happened. It would be able to find the responsible party, and then it would hold them accountable for paying for that remediation, for that cleanup. So if we can get PFAS to be classified as a hazardous substance, that would really give some accountability to polluters and hold them accountable for paying for this instead of taxpayers. The other, right now, also an issue is that it's still kind of unclear which products contain PFAS, and not only which products, but which industrial processes use PFAS. So, for example, when we're looking at the mining that's going on up north, there are several mining operations that use PFAS for some of their, separating ores from each other, or just in some of the machinery that they use. Well, we don't really know if they're planning on using that or not. It wasn't a part of their environmental assessment or anything. So, those are some questions that, because PFAS isn't regulated very heavily, we just don't have answers to a lot of that. So it's the kind of investigative work that we are looking to conduct over the next years. So what has Minnesota done so far about PFAS? The answer is actually quite a bit, which is great. We're one of the states that is taking action, and just over the last month, we passed a law banning food packaging in Minnesota, and we're one of, I think, 6 or 7 states that have done that. So starting January 1st, 2024, any intentionally added PFAS will be banned from food packaging. And, we're one of the states that passed some broad definitions of food packaging. So, this law will help keep, will be future-proof. If there's any new uses of PFAS in food packaging, other than what, has already been used, we're covered. So that's really great. It's still going to take a couple years to go into effect, but we have essentially become one of the states to take action on food packaging, which was a huge source of PFAS in our waterways, in our landfills, and directly from the food itself, we were being exposed to PFAS. So this is just a huge victory, and a huge thank you to Representative Amy Waslewick, Senator Carla Bigham, and all of our Canvas staff who really found our members and got them to take action. Thank you to our members for talking to their representatives about this. Huge victory. Minnesota is also one of the states that has set drinking water standards for PFAS, which is fantastic. We have what's called health-based values for several PFAS chemicals. These are set by the Department of Health, and these are down into the parts per trillion. So the important thing to know is that even a very small amount of PFAS can potentially be toxic, because it does not leave your body under, sometimes it's up to 8 years before it can leave your body. So these build up very quickly, and therefore, we're talking about parts per trillion here, which is like a drop of water in a swimming pool, is the amount that we're talking about. So we've set pretty protective standards for reference, PFOA and PFOS. We have some federal guidance levels from the Environmental Protection Agency. Those are at 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. So we are far below that, which is good. We are more protective than what the federal EPA says we should be. So that's all good news. We've also, for firefighting foam, we have taken some action on that. Like I mentioned before, we've restricted any uses for testing and training, which was a significant, they wanted to, of course, fire departments wanted to test their usage of this firefighting foam before, any actual issues. So that was a major source of contamination, was these testing anytime somebody came on the force, they would test with this foam and there'd be a significant amount of runoff. So we have banned that in Minnesota, and then any use of PFAS containing foam has to be reported. Also, the Pollution Control Agency has asked foam manufacturers to get green screen certified for any chemicals. Green screen is a certification that evaluates the toxicity of any chemicals you use in a product. So any manufacturers that go through that process, we can find a replacement for this PFAS foam and find something that works and is non-toxic. And so that's a really big step forward too. I will also say the state is doing a lot of cleanup right now. Of course, there's the 3M contamination. There's the stuff from firefighting foam in Bemidji and Duluth, and some chrome plating that happened in St. Louis Park. That's also a part of a remediation process. Like I said before, there's an investigation of closed landfills that just finished up, showed that almost all of our closed landfills have some amount of PFAS problem. So the state certainly is doing its due diligence in finding out what's going on. For the 3M settlement, for those who are interested or live in that region, I would encourage you to go to 3m.settlement. .state.mn.us. That's the official 3M settlement website. If you live in that region, there's a lot of information there that might be important to you in particular. But just for anybody here, the initial process is pretty close to complete. The state has come up with 3 different treatment scenarios to make sure all the people in Woodbury, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, that whole region, that they get clean drinking water. One of those scenarios is using St. Paul regional water. One of those is installing some really big, basically Brita filters, those granulated activated carbon filters in each of the water treatment drinking water plants in those areas. So they've come up with some really some good scenarios that'll get fresh drinking water to those areas. And some of these projects have already broken ground. So we're kind of on the way to getting clean drinking water to that area, which is really exciting. It's been since 2018 where this has started. So also the way the state purchases, they've taken action. The state of Minnesota had their furniture contract specifies no PFAS added. We have a compostable foodware contract that is requiring certification from Biodegradable Products Institute or BPI, and they're specifying no PFAS. And then, like I said before, they've communicated with foam manufacturers, encouraging this other certification. So some good actions here taken by the state. Also want to mention Target Corporation has been a huge leader in this in the retail space. They have a great chemical policy that they've had for years. They've made pledges to remove PFAS from their textile products by 2022. And they're already looking at other product sectors to remove PFAS from. So it's been a real pleasure to work with Target on this stuff. And we're really impressed by their initiative to protect their customers. So a good actor from here in Minnesota. So what's next? So one part of this, see here. There we go. Can everyone see this? So this is Minnesota's PFAS blueprint. I'm going to drop this link in here too. So Minnesota's PFAS blueprint was put together by it was a joint effort by all the state agencies here in Minnesota. And this is really, we were very impressed with the extremely thorough way that the state agencies addressed how we're going to really tackle PFAS in the upcoming years. And so I'm not going to go through all of this. Quite frankly, Clean Water Action, we don't fit in all of these categories, like measuring PFAS effectively. Of course, we're going to leave that to the state agencies and the scientific community. Same with understanding risks and human health hazards. But where we really fit into this big plan of how to address PFAS is we want to be preventing PFAS pollution, right? And that's where we really fit in. Already, one of the big priorities from Minnesota's PFAS blueprint was to ban PFAS in food packaging. And that was something we worked really hard on this year and got across the finish line. And so if we can do that, continue to keep getting rid of unnecessary uses of PFAS, we can dramatically decrease the amount of pollution that's there in the first place. And that starts with elections, right? I'm sure you hear this from us all the time, but we need environmental champions to be at the legislature in order to pass strong protective policy. PFAS is a statewide issue. It's not just an East Metro issue. Of course, we have, rural, these are not just an urban issue either, like some pollution issues can be construed to be. And it's not just a rural issue either, like agriculture or something. This is something that all of us are affected by. And so we really need those strong environmental champions in order to pass this kind of policy. So what's coming up for legislation? This is obviously our niche. We work at the Capitol. We take the power that we get from having, I think it's up to 80,000 members in the state, and we leverage that to pass strong policy. And there are a few areas that we could go after right away. And these are so-called, non-essential uses or avoidable uses. So this would be, firefighting foam. We can go further than testing and training bans. We can go for, like Washington State, we can get all uses that are unavoidable, or all unavoidable uses, all avoidable uses banned, all non-essential uses banned for firefighting foam. So anything that's not required by law, let's do it. Textiles, again, Vermont got this. We can do it too. Textiles are a huge source of PFAS. We can do it. Ski wax, electronics, all of these. Manufacturing uses, just last year, 2020, we passed a bill banning TCE, trichloroethylene uses for manufacturing. So that's something we could do as well for PFAS. That's not an essential use. Something we would say is essential is literally just something that is used like in a pacemaker, or something that, needs to be used for a medical use in order to keep someone alive. I mean, that, there are such uses for PFAS, and, we might need those, but anything else, we should stop at the source. We also need to list PFAS as a hazardous substance. As I said, that unlocks all sorts of power for the state to hold polluters accountable. We can get new authority for the state agencies to regulate PFAS without legislative action. This is something that, again, Washington State and California and a couple other, I think Maine as well, have done. They've basically said, hey, if you as the state agency think that this is putting Minnesotans, or, in their case, Washingtonians at risk, then you go ahead and regulate it. And that's power we could give our agencies if we wanted to. Other states have established PFAS task forces. which have their own authority to, again, address PFAS where needed, or at least designate some funds to investigate PFAS sources or something like that. And we could also create a take back program so that we're not, for firefighting foam in particular, but it could apply to other types of PFAS containing products potentially. But so that we don't have, fire departments sitting on huge amounts of PFAS foam. We want to take that back so that the state can dispose of it responsibly when a disposal technology is identified, which is being worked on right now by the federal government. Other things that we're planning on doing, of course, we're going to be continuing to engage with the 3M settlement process. We've been impressed so far with how the state has handled this, but we still want to make sure that everything goes as planned and that these folks get clean drinking water. It's been a couple decades since that's been the case. We're going to make sure we continue to share resources and other states' actions with our agencies. Oftentimes, our state agencies don't necessarily know when another state has banned something or when they've taken some sort of action, and so we share that with them so they know what's happening in a broader context nationally. We submit comments on anything the agencies are doing regarding PFAS because we see ourselves as sort of the voice of the people. And we want to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. And that's why we're doing stuff like this, because these are complex issues and nobody can be expected, if it's not your job, to really delve this deep on this issues, but it's so important and it affects our quality of life and our health. So in the meantime, for food packaging, we've banned this, but it goes into effect in 2024. So you still avoid grease-resistant packaging. Look for this BPI certification over here, pictured. And try to avoid anything that's a little bit suspect, like for instance, a takeout container that's made from cardboard somehow does not leak grease through it. That's a pretty telltale sign that there's PFAS. Some examples would be microwavable popcorn, pizza boxes. For textiles, if you're not somebody who is hiking every day or every year, or needs this super high performance outdoor clothing, consider avoiding that. It is convenient to have a jacket where all the water and snow beads right off, but we don't really need that. And it is almost all of those jackets have a PFAS layer on them. Of course, avoid stain resistant products. There's so many different ways to lift stains out of fabrics. There's a lot of different products that do that. We can avoid these stain resistant PFAS additions. If you live in an area that you're concerned about PFAS in your water, any granulated activated carbon or GAC filter will remove PFAS. And again, that's a Brita filter, a pure filter. You can get them from Costco. There's a lot of options for that. A little more expensive is those reverse osmosis systems, but those also remove PFAS effectively. But remember, again, to change out that filtration media. So for changing out your filter is really important for any of these like water filters like the one pictured, because if you let them go too far beyond what's recommended, they could reintroduce those contaminants into your water. So important if you're going to get a filter to change that out as the manufacturer recommends. So finally, these are the types of issues that we've seen a ton of results from people contacting their representatives. So please do write your congressional leaders. Make sure that you're asking questions of your candidates in local, state, and federal elections. We want to make this an election issue so that people who are elected remember PFAS when they enter office. And make sure to call your statewide elected officials. Governor Walz, we want him to know that PFAS is important to you. So that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much to everybody for coming tonight, even through some technical difficulties earlier on. I really appreciate you being here. So happy to answer any questions. Do we know how many manufacturers use PFAS in Minnesota? That's a great question. So we know that there are a few of them. Particularly, we know that there's at least one chrome plating manufacturer that's been around St. Louis Park. We know that there's a couple of industries that like textile mills that historically have used PFAS that probably do, but because it's not regulated, these are just questions that the state asks. They don't have to respond, right? So we're not quite at the stage where we know exactly how many manufacturers use PFAS. It's something that is kind of on the list to figure out. Yeah, great question. In fact, there's a new, I think just came out today, EWG Environmental Working Group just put out a new map of suspected PFAS sources across the nation. And, you can see in Minnesota, we certainly have quite a few of those potential sources in our state. So, yeah. Any other questions I can ask? Question from Twitter. How do you avoid buying products with PFAS in them? Yeah, so some of the last things I went over here, let me just jump into that again, actually. So, for example, again, you're looking for things that are grease resistant, stain resistant, weather resistant, water resistant. All of that stuff is going to be a pretty telltale sign that there might be a PFAS coating or something that's been added to give it that resistance, especially if it's I like to use that food packaging example of this is a cardboard box and I have a greasy tamale or something in it and it doesn't leak through. How is that happening? Usually that's a pretty telltale sign. Same with, if you've got like on Facebook or Twitter, you get an ad for like pants that, they're pouring water on and it's just like beating off. Well, that's probably going to be a PFAS coating or a spray or something that they add, or sometimes they even weave it right into the material that gives it that water resistant property. So those are some telltale signs. See another question here. How can we best address restaurants, grocery stores using PFAS and have them phase it out before 2024? Well, I think part of it is education, right? We want to, certainly there's a lot of stores, especially in Minnesota. I think we have a lot of grocery stores that want to do the right thing. Not just the co-ops, but a lot of these grocery stores have taken action on other things voluntarily. So I think part of it is education. Another thing I think is we can shoot for something federal that goes more broadly. And I think the other thing is the MPCA will be sending out a notice to all of these companies saying, you can no longer sell when 2024 comes around, you can no longer sell this. So they'll probably be in the process of removing it for about a year or year and a half before it goes into effect, because they don't want to get shut down for non-compliance, right? So they will phase it out before 2024, but yeah, I do wish we could have gotten it a little bit sooner than 2024, but those are the types of compromises that have to happen. Any last questions here? I know we're kind of approaching the top of the hour here, so happy to answer anything else though.
Do you mind if I jump in about the grocery store really quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my program is Field Fork, and I work on sustainable agriculture, and we're working on talking to grocery stores about everything. And one of the most green grocery stores is actually Aldi. So they actually have done the most initiatives to be able to phase out certain types of chemicals, reduce waste, increase composting, everything like that. I'm not saying that no products on their shelf contains PFAS, but if you are looking for a more green grocery store that is not a co-op, I always recommend co-ops, but if you're not available or one's not available by you, you can always check out Aldi. Same with Kowalski's too.
Great, thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. I didn't know that actually. I knew Aldi was up there, but that's great. Great. Well, thanks. And I saw Jen here posted a fact sheet in our chat. We'll post that link as well on our Facebook and Twitter. These are the 10 things you can do about toxic PFAS chemicals. It's a great way to avoid those products. So until we ban everything that we need to ban, that's a good way to avoid it. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Make sure to look out for the next Water Action Wednesday coming up, I believe, on August 11th. So thanks so much, and have a fantastic night.